Just because you're an amazing salesperson doesn't mean you're going to be a great sales leader. I mean, the reality is, whether you're B2B or B2C, people do business
H
with
to H.
people they like and they trust. Period. I am radically candid. I have a newer nickname as of 5 or 6 years ago. It's called the CEO Whisperer. I build trust, so that's going back to relationships, but I tell the C-suite what they need to hear, not what they want to hear.
I'm actually wowed by the story of yours, and there you go. I'm putting a spotlight on you. Yeah, even though I said I actually won't be doing that, but I like the story in terms of the journey itself.
Yeah.
So if we can put aside our goals and whatnot and just focus on the actual journey, I think this is important one to be told and retold. And maybe we start there, I guess.
Yeah.
The last thing, I went through entire your like LinkedIn feed and whatnot, and the last thing I watched is I think one of the TED Talks, or was it TED
Mm.
Talk? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll start with that. A little bit gloomy, I guess, but it gives a very good like a base for I think what we can actually talk about for the rest of the session.
Sounds good.
So yeah, let's start there. The way I want to form this question is a little bit different than I usually start because when I interview guys and talk to people in general in tech industry, that's kind of my space, right? But it's not like predominantly that area. But entrepreneurs in general who have developed a product, a service, or whatnot, they typically had some problem they wanted to fix, and this solution for this problem was the business that they built, right? So
Yeah.
in your case, I want to start on one a little bit different end, and that's the resilience part of what you
Mm.
like to preach about on your talks.
Yeah.
So give me a gist.
Yeah, well, so I have developed extreme resilience as a result of, unfortunately, some fairly significant trauma, adversity, and challenge in my life. Starting with my very early years, I'm born to a drug-addicted teenage mother who was exceptionally abusive to me. I went in and out of the child welfare system. She let people watch me after incidents. I am fortunate that one of the most selfless things she could have done in caring things for me was give me up for adoption there. So there was a couple that would watch me often after one of these abusive incidents. And after several of these, the woman who watched me asked her to adopt me, and she became my mother. So, for 4 years in a horrible, environment, sleeping on the floor on a mattress, to living with a family with a mother in particular who was extremely loving, yet lower on the socioeconomic scale. My dad was a janitor. My mom was a secretary. Um, that's in large part why I started working so young. But I've had a multitude of other things. I was raped at 14, death of my ex from cancer. From on a corporate standpoint, like so many corporate restructures, mergers and acquisitions. So my life is about being resilient, and making choices in terms of how I'm going to respond and move through that and not let it stop me.
Yeah, well said. And the way you actually started this is a little bit, I mean, it calls for a deep listening of what you're saying is like the good thing about, everything that happened before you started your I guess those were teenage years, or when was it when your mother gave you for adoption?
Oh, the first 4 years of my life, I was with
Oh
my
my God. And
biological mother. And normally, most children, young children,
yeah,
don't remember things before 5 or 6, but it was quite traumatic.
yeah.
So I do, and it toughened me up. Maybe a really really tough kid. So I'd say my adoptive mother had some work to kind of break down some of the walls I'd put up.
Yeah, the way you said it, though, it was like the good thing that she gave you for adoption, and it just gives another like whole different level of, you know, just appreciating the situation.
Yeah.
And so Yeah, the reason why I wanted to start with this is because of like general misconception, which I think I resonate with when people say it's, I mean, here we have a saying, I'm not sure if I'm gonna translate it properly in English, but it's like uh, nail is, how would I say this? It's like nail is pulled out by another nail or something like that. It's like
Yeah.
when you have a like a wooden board and you have a nail in it and you want to take it out, essentially you take another one and you just, you know, clap it and the other one's gonna drop out. And it's kind of the way people say here when you have something bad that happened to you and then it made you stronger, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, different cultures, different people, different languages have their own version of it. But essentially, what I think is actually true is uh, the scar tissue is more rough. It's not stronger, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Unfortunately.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. So, how much do you think these events actually helped you or didn't help? Because right now you are one very successful individual in different areas within different businesses. You're in different boards, um, et cetera, et cetera. So how much do you think this actually shaped you for better or for worse?
Uh, I think it shaped me for better overall. I think there were moments of worse, but that I learned from that then subsequently made me better business, better leader, better human. I do believe even when it comes to resilience, I think there's a portion of it that is actually innate in your DNA. I
Yeah.
think I am naturally like I'm a fighter, flight or fight. I'm a fighter. And so I think some of that is just innate in who I am in my DNA. But I think this circumstance helped me build the muscle to be more resilient,
Okay.
and has allowed me to, do all that I have. I think knowing that I wanted to be better than the circumstances that I was born into or then raised by. There was no money at home for, like, I didn't go on my high school graduation trip because my parents couldn't afford it. We rarely ever went on vacation. I never went without food or clothing or a house over my head. So it wasn't, compared to others, I had it good, but not much else. But as a result, I wanted to do better. And so I started working. I could control how I performed at school and at the office. And I think if the early years and all that challenge and trauma hadn't happened, I'm not sure I would have maybe fought quite as hard or set my goals as high as I did then and I do now.
Yeah. One interesting thing you actually just mentioned. I have this friend of mine, David Hensel. I'll definitely actually do an intro after we are done because I think you would definitely like his energy. And he has this course called Love Not Fear, and the whole
Mm.
concept is backed by what it's called, Outwitting the Devil book. Well, I mean the name itself, not the whole concept of the course.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the book?
No, I'm not.
Oh man, it's you have to read it. It's about a guy who's interviewing a devil. And the long story short is there is a circumstance that this guy was able to subdue devil to actually do the interview and then make him expose his like most efficient tools in controlling humanity. And his most successful tool is actually fear. And fear of success, fear of of failure, fear of whatnot. It's like that one thing that's holding us back throughout our life. And
I love it. It's sort
yeah.
of a philosophy that I have, Ivan. There's a quote by George Adair.
Mhm.
And it says, everything you've ever wanted lives on the other side of fear. So I'm gonna have to read that book because it's very I think the magic happens when you're
Yeah.
in like a place of discomfort or fear.
Yeah. Make sure to find the one that's not censored because the original manuscript was never, it was written in 30s. I'd say
Mm.
like maybe 37 for some reason. I have this number in my head. Maybe it's a bit before that, but it was not published until the 2011, maybe something like that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and the main pushback was from educational, supposedly, and from like church related circles. Yeah, because you know he was a critic for both of these like very important institution in our society.
Yeah.
And so supposedly that was the reason why he wasn't published immediately, and even when he was, it was censored here and there. So uncensored version gives you even even the censored one gives you pretty good, like the core of it, and the point is there. But the
Yeah.
uncensored one is definitely better. So yeah, make sure to
I
definitely
will.
recommending that. And why did I mention this? Um, hmm, hopefully my thoughts
It'll come back
path
to you.
will come back. Yeah. But anyways, yeah, let me jump into something else that was interesting for me. How your nickname in your environment changed from Iron Maiden.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, can you walk me through that?
Yeah, I've had several nicknames from a professional and mostly professional. A couple of them are have translated into my personal life over the years. So the first time I learned at work, I had a nickname. I was in my 20s. So I became an executive at 24 years old. The only woman, youngest by two
Hmm.
decades. I also happen to be a brand new mother. My older son was only 3 months old at that time. I entered the workforce again at age 11. My first leadership role is at 14. And I think leadership has evolved significantly in all of these years. I just turned 50, so we're talking almost 40 years in the working world for me. And it was very much about this like command and control type leadership. And so that's what I saw. I thought I needed to, act a little bit like that. I thought I needed to prove myself and not have anyone question why I had the seat at the executive table, particularly as a young female. And so I was all business all the time. Rarely did I show emotion, and I definitely didn't show vulnerability. But that's actually not who I am
That's
personally.
what I wanted
So
to
I found,
ask. That's what I wanted
yeah,
to ask, right? Was that like part of you, or that something you felt like you needed this like level of shielding, or
yeah, I I was and I can be very good at like putting up walls and protecting myself after dealing with as much trauma and adversity as I have. Like I have very broad shoulders and I can handle a lot. But so I thought I needed to show that to the world. I it in my personal life, like I'm highly emotional. Like I'm the type who cries watching the Humane Society commercials. We're recording this just after World Cup soccer, and when I see, the players standing there and tearing up as
yeah.
their national anthems play, that makes me cry. Like I'm super like emotional. I cry when I see people cry. I cry when I see people happy. I did not let people see that at work. And I never shared my story. I never speak about the vulnerability, my fears, because I thought that's what I had to do from a work perspective. And I didn't, at the time, I thought that was a sign of weakness. And so this mask I wore proverbially or figuratively all the time. And so that's how I got the Iron Maiden.
Mhm.
For another reason. I initially I was like, well, it's unfortunate, like Margaret Thatcher-esque. But I've always been very strong at delivering business results. I can make the difficult business decisions. So I thought, well, maybe it's because I've already had to do restructure. I'm very comfortable with performance management. But I realized, sure, that was maybe a part of it. And for that part, I'm proud that I drive those results. But when I realized it wasn't intended to be positive, was talking to a colleague. I'd come in on the Monday morning after the weekend and talking about what we'd done. And I said I'd seen a movie, and then I like how much I was crying during the movie, and I was joking about those little popcorn napkins. And she turned and she looked at me and she's like, Vic, she's like, I thought you'd be the type of person who laughed at people who cried at movies.
Hmm.
That Ivan is when it struck me because I'm like, if that's who people think I am, like
Hmm.
then I know that Iron Maiden is not a nickname I want to aspire to, and I need to dramatically change the way that I show up. I realized people were doing the things I asked, yes, because of hierarchy and I was the leader, but probably a little bit more out of fear versus a sense of followership. So it was at that moment where I knew I had to pivot and I needed to demonstrably show up very different and much more the authentic Victoria.
I'm curious, do you maybe have some sort of understanding of how successful was your, well, I mean, no, how was your leadership methods and results? How were they changed, if at all, when you changed the nickname from Iron Maiden to, was it Turtle?
Yeah, so the turtle. So I've given a nickname. It's both that one's the one of the ones that's used both personally and professionally to represent that I am extremely resilient. So it doesn't mean slow because I'm anything but slow. I'm incredibly impatient, but rather I do have a thick, tough exterior. I can handle almost any. No, I've handled everything that's ever been thrown at me, and I will continue to do so. But inside, there's a softness. I'm in that emotional piece. So that's how I got that nickname. And yes, to your question, huge difference in my relationships, professionally in particular, and the leadership and the satisfaction and engagement of the people that I worked with. But again, I had needed, it was very conscious. I'm fortunate that the company that I worked at, where I got that nickname, went through an acquisition. So I ended up changing companies. It was a lot easier to do a
Hmm.
hard reset versus trying to reset when everyone already knows you. But
Yeah.
again, it was not natural or comfortable. I needed to do things like walking into the, meeting room, and instead of launching straight into the agenda, going, let's take a little bit of time. Let's spend the first 5 minutes just chit-chatting and talking about, what we did, learning about one another, and then starting to tell more of the stories. Like for people to understand, I took my first real vacation at age 32. And it wasn't at that point because I couldn't afford it. It's because I was all work all the time, traveling extensively. I worked 60 to 80 hours a week. I took no maternity leave or basically no maternity leave with my two children, but for people to understand why. They're like, is she just a hard ass? And so when I started to show up and say, like, this is where I come from. There's a work ethic and a drive, but it's fueled by the fact that I wanted to be better than the circumstance in which I was raised. It just, it explained me, and in other cases, it bonded or gave connection to others to go, I dealt with maybe not the exact same, but some of these different things. And so it really fueled, I realized so quickly how different my relationships were, that it just became my philosophy as a leader. And I tried to coach others on what I now call whole human leadership.
Yeah. Hmm. It actually came back to me what I wanted to say and then ask earlier. So, this friend of mine is having this very particular personality trait, let's call it that way, and it's easy for him to, I mean, it's easy. It's natural for him to go through different obstacles or, let's say, maybe even traumas, etc. Um, and while working with him throughout this course of his, and as I said, we're friends, so we talk a lot. And then I had the opportunity to reflect on what he's saying and how I can translate it into my own environment. And I concluded, I don't know if I'm wrong or right here, but I concluded that people who have this natural tendency um, to naturally get over certain obstacles or just handle them better than the other ones, they have one advantage, but they also have this, let's call it a challenge, because I'll actually take him for example. What's the name of his situation? I forgot, man. What is the called? What is it called when you can't picture anything visually? You can only think. Oh my God.
Uh, yeah,
The crazy thing is, I literally yesterday was talking with someone about it, and I now I can't recall the name. Aphantasia. Aphantasia, right? Yeah, and so it's for him, for example, it's easier than for the rest of us to get over certain traumatic events. And then throughout his course, he's essentially giving us tools to be able to do that, even though we are not, we don't have this same personality trait, right? And I'm just
yeah,
wondering, like I'm concluding here that it may not be possible. Whoever figures that out will make millions, billions, and whatnot. Because You said something which is why this particular topic came into mind, and I didn't even plan to go this way, but it's like it was always you. Like you were always this person who always was a fighter. But what if you're not? Then you need a very particular, very efficient set of tools to be able to go through, these
Yeah.
traumatic events and actually come out stronger.
Yeah, that's where in the TED Talk I gave around healthy resilience,
Hmm.
that's where I gave the steps to, and I call it healthy resilience because I think some people wear it like a badge of honor. Like I get through this, like, and I can handle anything, but I think at some point they crack and crumble if you don't work through it and learn how to handle it more effectively. So for me, so again, yes, there's innately, I said, I do think that my DNA, the fighter part of me, but I do think I think everyone has some of that. To what degree? I think I have a large degree of that, but I think it's like a muscle you can develop as well. And so for me, I talk about the steps to being healthy in dealing with trauma, challenge, adversity, and like so being resilient. As for me, I bucket it into five broad, steps. I say, the first is let first of all be clear always on the goals and the objectives that you set for yourself across all the facets of your life,
Yeah.
personal, professional, financial, health, all those things. The next is, and this is where the one I think most people, particularly those who just power through it, don't do, is the second one, which is there's a level of self-reflection and self-awareness that I think is really important. Like, maybe you didn't invite the trauma or the challenge, but have you put yourself into a situation to make it more challenging? Or how are you reacting in that? And so that's what I mean by sitting with like and self-reflecting on it. And then the third step is being really intentional based upon what you've discovered through that self-reflection to be really both strategic and intentional in everything from the thoughts you have to the actions that you take that drive you forward towards that goal or objective. And the fourth one is just surrounding yourself with people that support you. But support doesn't mean unabashedly, they don't question you. I want you to surround yourself people who will challenge you, that maybe help identify the blind spots, and in some cases, it means professional help, psychiatrist, psychologist, career executive coach, health
Yeah.
coach, whatever it is. And the last one, and this one was in particular for me when I talk about what's required for healthy resilience, I am my toughest critic. I always have been. I set an extremely high bar. Give yourself permission to fail.
Mm.
Um, Dust yourself up, get back up, and anchor back to your goal. So that's where, yes, innate DNA to be a fighter helps. But I think if you follow those steps, I think most people can, not just survive, but thrive more effectively through a lot of the challenges.
Oh, I definitely agree. That's one of very good tools, actually. And the last thing you mentioned, give yourself permission to fail.
Mm.
Uh, Funny you should mention that, but I take like strong position on mistakes are good as long as you make them at least like once, not more than twice, not more than three times, essentially, right?
Yeah.
But like, how are you going to learn if you don't actually fail, right? So
Yeah.
we don't learn by being A students. You just
Yeah.
learn to memorize, and that's the only thing you actually learn. And I think that was the one of the things that the author of The Outwitting the Devil was actually criticized for.
Oh,
So, and
really?
yeah, I think that was like one of his narratives in the book. Cool, good stuff. Um, One thing I wanted to go back to earlier, you mentioned something when you were talking about the transition from one to another, like nicknames. And so I'm wondering, there are definitely, we can observe this, we can even measure it, that in the corporate world, there are these two different schools of thought. So one is, as you said, empathy does not mean that it's not weakness. On the
Yeah.
other hand, you can literally like measure the expectation from people not to show empathy, especially in leadership positions. Um, I'm not saying one is right, the other one isn't. It could be, but I'm just wondering, like, how do you how do you choose? I mean, if you're fresh new leader out there, and this is like everyday situation for a lot of people in tech, I think, because in tech you get easily assigned with this title of like leader, team leader, or manager or whatnot, and these guys are actually and girls are tech leaders, but not essentially people leaders, and this is where
Mm.
the rupture of the thought process happens. So how do we know which one is better? How do we know which one to actually apply?
Um, I I personally I don't think it's a choice. I think if you asked almost any employee, they would prefer to work with leaders whom they trust. Ideally, they like at some point, being a whole human leader that's empathetic doesn't mean that I expect everyone's going to like me. Do I want that? Yes. So I think there is a better way for leadership that includes a balance. So there
Mhm.
are, there are appropriate times to apply more empathy than others, and times where, when you've tried to coach and develop someone and their performance simply isn't changing, or their willingness um, to move forward positively, then at that point you switch a little bit more of the empathy off and you need to move. So I think it's learning to have both strong understanding of the business, clarity around success metrics, outcomes, performance objectives, and being empathetic, transparent, being vulnerable and human, but balancing it in the appropriate time. So for
Yeah.
me, it's not one or the other, it's both with the right balance. And what I will say though, and it is common in tech, Ivan, you're right, but I see it in all industries. I spent most of my career now in professional services, business to business, working with clients across all different industries. The problem most companies make is they promote their top performers to leadership,
Mhm.
which just because you're an amazing salesperson doesn't mean you're going to be a great sales leader. And then they don't, and which can be okay. Like you want to take opportunities, you want to reward performance to higher levels in the organization for those who want it, but please give them the coaching and the development where there are new skills that are required to be developed.
Yeah, the funny thing is when you talk to these people who are about to be promoted, and when they actually see that they're going to be responsible for um, things like motivating your team, they typically go like, not sure. Because I'm like, I'm good at what I do, but I'm not sure that I want to be responsible for entire team's performance. I'm like, I'm a rock star in what I do, but don't expect from me to, to motivate people, to coach them and so on. I'm just like, put me in the machine and I'll be a
Well,
rock star.
You're right. And I think, for many, and for me too, early in my career, my definition of success was about moving higher up the corporate ladder, managing more people, large P&Ls. And I think many people think that that means success. I remember coaching a woman that worked for me. She was in finance and she wanted to move up to the next level, director level, where she was going to have people. And I remember at the time saying to her, like, just knowing her personality, and I knew her fairly well outside of work as well. I'm like, Brenda, I don't think that's going to be the right fit. If this is what you want, and again, she was a top performer, I said, I will happily give you coaching and support and align you with other people, particularly within the finance function that you think. And within not even a year, maybe 6 months, she's like, Vic, you're right. I hate it. I hate
Yeah.
it. I don't like this. She's like, I feel like I'm in high school. I'm babysitting. I don't enjoy it. Not at all. And so I think people need to get comfortable. Like you can be an incredible individual contributor, taking on more scope, more responsibility, more complexity. And that is a new definition of success. It doesn't mean you need to, have a ladder underneath you of large teams to be successful.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, so talking about this kind of stuff, you mentioned that you went through a lot of mergers, acquisitions. Anything stands out? Anything you want to share?
Hmm.
Some experience in that area, so I just want to make sure our notes are aligned. So,
Yeah. So I have so many. So first of all, I bought my first company at
okay,
age 20. So I've bought and sold and built companies and myself. So I've gone through like what does that look like as an entrepreneur? I call myself, by the way, an intrapreneur. So I am
nice.
work predominantly for large corporates with a very entrepreneurial spirit, and I've always had the little side hustle on the
I
side.
have to ask, sorry, I'm being
Yeah.
rude here, totally, I know, but where did you get this term? I have this term and I understand it perfectly and I agree with it. I'm resonating with it perfectly. And that's how I actually got out of the being an employee into running my own business. I can't
Yeah.
remember where I read about this. I somehow recall Cynthia Shapiro in my head, but I'm not sure if that's from her or somewhere else.
I don't know where I heard the whole entrepreneurial
Yeah,
piece. It identifies me for sure.
yeah, perfect.
So on that merger and acquisition side, I've now been a part of 42 merger, acquisition, divestiture, like related transactions. As a result of those, not to mention just being in the corporate world, I've done more than 100 corporate restructures. So I have several that like stand out to me, and I've seen also where many fail. And so, for me, one of the most stressful times for me. It was a very condensed period. It was in less than 2 years. I worked for a global corporate travel organization that was in a joint venture with one of its competitors.
Hmm.
They had represented different parts of the world. That joint venture ended as they wanted to expand and do things slightly differently. They rebranded, so new company name. They went public, and then they acquired 6 companies in the span of 18 months. So much incredible transformation and change in a very short period of time. That was the first time. I'm originally from Canada. It was the first time I was relocated to the US
Hmm.
to lead a lot of our North American teams at that point. And, it's a lesson going from, this young, at that point I might have been 28, 30 years old. Going to New York, that exercised all kinds of patience. I said I'm not generally, because there was some team members that I understood had such depth in relationships with clients that even if it didn't make sense in a pure restructuring standpoint to have these extra leaders, the connections they had with their clients and portfolios were very, very critical and created risk. And there was one woman for me who she was probably a 60-year-old New Yorker who'd spent her entire career in travel. I'd only been in it for a few years. So she's like, who is this young thing that is now my boss, this Canadian chick coming down here? Like, I felt I got it all from her. But she managed one of our largest clients, really critical. Like it was a large magazine media conglomerate that it was just also a good logo to have as part of the business. So for a whole host of reasons, I'm like, we can't lose that woman. It took a long time for me to build trust with her, demonstrate to her that she had a whole host of skills that I could learn from and experience, but vice versa. I'd come from, different backgrounds and doing different things. And so that for me ended up being one of my most successful, like proudest moments. After that, hers was one of the first acquisitions. And by the end, when we got to number 5 or number 6, she at that point was one of my biggest supporters in helping bring on side the new acquired leaders that we brought on as well. And so I love doing it. I've done many that, like I said, that was almost 20 years ago now. I've done so many more since then, and oftentimes I actually consult for companies to help them through
Nice.
their M&A or transformation.
With that 60-year-old lady, I'm guessing that was during the time of Iron Maiden, yeah?
Yes, I was in the early stages, of making that. 28 is when I learned I had that nickname, but I wouldn't say it took years for me to like get,
Okay.
earn the title of turtle. So I was somewhere in between there.
Nice. Um, I think, if I'm not mistaken, that like from your LinkedIn feed, is that like sales that's based on deep relationship is something that you are like promoting. Maybe that's a strong word, but that's something you're probably, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Uh,
relationship-based sales for
yeah.
sure. I mean, again, most of my career is business to business, not
Hmm.
business direct to
Yeah.
consumer, who, the influencer feeds or, quality and price and those sorts of things. I mean, the reality is whether you're B2B or B2C, people do business
H
with
to
people
H.
they like and they trust, period. And so that's why I advocate relationship-based sales. It's also why I talk about what the importance of personal branding for a multitude of reasons, but also very important around how we build relationships. It's part of why I have a love-hate relationship with the large global public companies I have worked for much of my
Okay.
career, right? In that I love global firms, larger, meatier, hairy, complex. That I like. But many of these companies are so maniacally focused on quarter to quarter results
Yeah.
that I feel they compromise the relationships often with clients and most definitely with their employees. So for me, like I remember working for it was a large tech company. I took over a very large portfolio. I remember they told me little bit of a troubled project that I was had happened prior to me stepping in. I find out it's not a little project. It was like a $75 million first of a kind project. Went horribly wrong. I think both the company I worked for and the client jointly owned the outcome. Five of those client executives were fired for it. It damaged the company I worked for, their reputation. And I remember saying, this is going to be 18 to 24 months to
Mm.
rebuild. I mean, they were locked into. We were doing mainframe, software, but for all the services-based stuff that they had choice or shorter contracts for, I proudly to say that turnaround in 15 months, but that was a significant amount of time invested in building trust and building alignment and finding new partners and relationships. I remember telling the company that, and after my first or second quarter in that role, they're like, "Well, where's the growth?" And I'm like, "Guys, what part of like 18 to 24 months to turn this around did you not understand?"
Yeah.
And so that's how I operate. And then, but now having moved around every 2, 3 years over the last many years, clients and teams follow me, and that allows me to step in and immediately start to demonstrate some success. But it's an investment in of time, energy, and hopefully you do it from a place of like care and compassion. When I think of personal branding, the Keith Ferrazzi wrote the book Never Eat Alone, and which is a good book about how to network, how to do it strategically, intentionally. But he talks in there about doing it from a place of generosity and not greed, and that's how I approach my networking and I approach my relationships. I hope we do business together, but in the meantime, I want to build a real trusted relationship with you.
Yeah. Hmm. Interesting. Um, I can't remember the number of books that I read something similar on this topic, and I'm coming right now from the standpoint of introverted person who's in tech and is constantly figure out how to like reinvent the sales or reinvent the product or the offering. And I know I've been in those shoes for I don't know how many times where we are so badly thinking about signing the customer and not really thinking long term that,
Yeah.
it's painful, but it's important lesson, I think, for most, especially new entrepreneurs, I think.
Yeah, I think those in tech struggle with this notion the most.
Hmm.
They have a product, a service, they have a toolkit of things they can sell
Yeah.
uh, without. And so for me, many times I'm having to coach the tech teams that I lead and the salespeople in those to say, like, what problem, what challenge are you solving for? Right. So the notion of like how to storytelling and story arc. And so they walk in like they're like, hey, I've got the software and I need to sell it, but is it aligned to the corporate strategy? Is it solving for the pain points around either revenue generation, driving net promoter scores, reducing cost, like improving workflow? Like what is it? And so they know the tech so well, the product or the service, but how do you connect that to the person? And so many times I actually start with like when I meet with these leaders, like tell me about your role. Tell me about how are you measured? What does success look like for you? What's on the strategic agenda that you need to drive this year? And then ideally, I have products or services that can solve for that. But
Hmm.
getting some very techie people to like do that, which is why oftentimes there's a bridge and you do like the two in the box of those that are really strong in the relationship storytelling bit with the like technical experts.
Do you have like maybe like startup leaders, founders in general who are asking for help in terms of positioning their communication, their sales approach and strategy and so on?
Many. So
Hmm.
I, both for the companies I've worked for, I'm usually asked to help with storytelling, doing, presentations, public speaking for more of some of the senior folks, and also around personal branding, because back to the people do business with people they like and they trust. What I see, particularly from the tech companies I worked for, is you've got all of these, really smart, deeply experienced leaders, but they post on LinkedIn, and all they do is promote company content. Like you never get to know, like it feels like a constant sales pitch. And when I see that, I'm like scroll through. I'm like, I don't want to see that. Who are you? Why am I buying from you? Why would I buy from you versus another? Those kinds of things. So it is something I'm asked to, help with, quite frequently. And um, it's a good and a bad thing. Often they talk, consultants will get a bad name and they're like, oh, they bring in one team and then they like switch them out later. Sure, that happens in the pure consulting firms. You bring in the big guns, so to speak, the senior partners, and then you bring in some of the, the more junior people to execute the work. But in the tech companies, I think it's much more valuable because you can find people who can do the translation from business to tech and can
Hmm.
do the stories and build a relationship. But then when it does come time to doing the work, you need the deeply technical. So again, there's a balance, and I think you need to strike that balance. But back to like skilling people and helping them, bridge the gap where they might exist in terms of core competencies versus some things that will help them be further successful. Incumbent upon the leadership teams to help identify those and build that skill and bridge that gap.
I got one challenge for you. So let's say that so we have one tech startup founder right now who is asking us for broad strokes of topics that they should be focusing on before they actually can say that they are going out on the market. And what I'm thinking of is personal branding, website story strategies overall. Like, of um, what's the minimum package size for one startup founder to say, okay, I have these check boxes to tick, and while working on them, it will help me position my product out there. The reason why I ask is somewhat obvious, I think, but many of us, especially in tech industry, we don't really know how to communicate. And you just gave one example just like 2 minutes ago. Uh,
Yeah. I don't think, I mean, there's a standard package. I guess this sounds very much like a consultant where if I'm going
I
to say
dumbed it
it,
down. Maybe I used wrong phrasing totally, but I mean, like, what are the,
I mean, I
areas I
think
have to
there's,
focus?
so I do coach a lot of startup founders. And I mean, I've been a part of companies, and some of them are actually for women founders where we're giving them grants or funds or interest-free loans to help develop. And so I've sat in so many pitches. And so I'm like, first of all, what's I'm assuming that the founders and the ones you're working with, is there the right product market fit, right? What's the total addressable market? Like I'm assuming you will have done that. You understand what competitors are out there before you launch into the space. So assuming you've done all that, there's still there's company branding, that I think is important. Like
Yeah.
what problems are you solving in the world for them? So as I talked about storytelling, and so I think that needs to be exceptionally clear from a corporate branding perspective, and then there's the personal branding piece of it. People are buying you. And so if you're a founder and you're doing a raise, or maybe you're doubling and you're doing them, not only as the CEO and founder or even technical founder, but you are also doing sales, people are buying from you, the human, as well. So why would people choose to do that? Why are they going to trust you, particularly if it's a new product that you're bringing to market? So this is where there's a foundation around what I believe an effective personal brand is that so many get wrong. So, when I worked for IBM, at the time they were under Ginny Rometty, and then she was retiring and Arvind came in. But LinkedIn ranked me the number one social seller worldwide for IBM, 350,000 employees at that time. And so they had me when they saw that. And so one, they leveraged it heavily, which is cool because I like doing speaking and in various engagements and whatever. So it fueled me to do that. But they asked me to develop the education for other executives. And I'm glad they did because many of those leaders got it wrong, and it's not unique. I'm not here to like slag IBM. I see it everywhere. All they do is talk about their eminence. That's the word that IBM uses, others use. That is your specialty, your education, your experience, your credentials. That is foundational for sure. But then and this is where it gets maybe uncomfortable a little bit more so for tech or like deeply functional experts in certain areas to move beyond. So that I say there's four parts to personal brand. One is yes, the eminence, your subject matter expertise, industry expertise, and credentialization. The next is who are you? What who are you as a human? Like interests, passions, maybe it's traits as a leader. Like what makes you you? Did you, I was coaching a chief marketing officer from a tech company, and she was so good at building the corporate brand, but she never told her own story. She grew up in
Mm.
Africa, got dropped to the US at 17 to go to college. That has made her resilient. That's allowed her to do exceptionally well in the startup world. I'm like, you need to tell that story, and tell stories about what you learned about life in Africa, and coming over. So that's the second part. The third is very connected to that, but still distinct, is what makes you different from others. So for me as a leader, and particularly in a B2B environment, I am radically candid. I have a newer nickname as of 5 or 6 years ago is called the CEO Whisperer. I build trust, so that's going back to relationships, but I tell the C-suite what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. That makes me different than the majority of people who do what I do in the world of consulting and professional services. So figure out what makes you different from others. The last one is around like legacy and impact. What do you want to be known for? So,
Yeah.
okay, building a great product, lots of revenue, maybe you exited it, you did that a second time. Cool. But like when I die, I don't want people in my eulogy going, oh my God, at this point, I will have done 100 mergers and acquisitions and I had all these nicknames. No, I'd rather people talking about who I was as a human. Who did I touch? Did I leave workplaces, community, and world a better place? That I raised two really good humans and my two children? So and so go out in the world. How do you then activate that brand? Is go and be really intentional about being this authentic, words abused. It's not all about the beautiful fancy filters out there. Show the warts and all, show that you're human, show why people want to connect. Why do they want to buy from you? Why do they want to work for you? Why do they want to partner with you?
Yeah, but i- i- I mean, do you see that there is a completely new space now for consulting, consulting industry to expand because people see what they see and then they're feeding their cognitive engine with what they see on social media, which is not built to represent true event truth, and it somehow it builds shackles, it builds all these guardrails for how do you actually go out on these social media and how do you tell the story if you tell it at all. You know it
Yeah, Ivan, it is tough. I mean, there's and particularly because of AI right now, the amount of slop, right, that's out there, the amount of like fake. And I will admit, I use AI significantly as a writing partner. I recently started, even though I do tons of podcasts and I do like live media, so there's lots of video content of me. Short form video works very
Mhm.
well. So I have a digital twin as well that I use.
Yeah.
And so, I now talk to my husband who's not from the tech space at all. And every time I'm like, oh, babe, did you see something? He's like, it's probably AI, right? Like it leaves everyone questioning, that trust. And so I think there's a fine line, but it's also where I encourage some real reality and storytelling. Like I made a decision so there was a period a number of years ago, I kept winning a bunch of awards. Yay, me, whatever. Like I'm happy for that. But everyone, I think, thought things were wonderful. At the time, I'd had a horrific accident that left me in a wheelchair for months. My younger son won't mind me saying this. He's got mental health problems for which he was not taking his medication for, and he got involved in drugs. Like there was just lots going on in my life. Now, I didn't tell what was happening with my son, but I chose to be public over the fact that you're seeing this beautiful facade of me winning awards and being successful, but there's another side. So actually, in that, when I posted it, I posted the story where I'd been brought. A picture was the profile of me laying in the hospital bed after being brought in from the ambulance. And I'm
Mm.
like, this is what life is looking. It's a balance, and it's about being resilient. And so this is where I would encourage the your listeners to think about that holistic brand story, the arc, what are the messages you want to live or you want to share, and but anchor it always with truth, and authenticity and some real reality. Like I think that's what builds connection, and that's the people I choose to closely follow. I've got massive followership, but the ones I spend a lot of time paying attention to their feeds is because I see something similar.
But do you think people have problem sharing, or they have problem sharing because they think their story may not be that interesting comparing to? I'll give you an example actually, and the reason why I ask your opinion on this. Was it, I don't know, 5, 6, maybe even more, when Instagram became like the thing.
Mm.
Not at the very beginning, but somewhat later. I remember this, was it like a piece someone did in part of the maybe bigger documentary, or I can't remember what was it, but the person was interviewed because they bought a piece of the plane, like a wreck of the plane.
Oh,
But yeah, but it had like a beautiful interior still. And this, I think it was a guy, I can't remember. I think it was a guy who is actually renting this wreckage to what we would call influencers to make their videos inside, like, oh, I'm flying to whatever
oh,
location. And the reason, and I mean, the point of the documentary and that piece was how life shown on social media is actually fake, and how people should be encouraged to share whatever, their real stories out there. And, so people have stories to tell, but they may be thinking like, oh my God, look at this guy. He's flying every week on, I don't know, like Hong Kong, Singapore, whatever location or exotic places for vacation. And like what I'm doing, I never went out of the, I don't know, like US or whatever country of origin that is of the person who's actually thinking like this. And I'm just saying, maybe the problem is the encouragement, because what they see is, you know, scary, unreal, and putting unreal expectation of what should be shared on social media.
yeah, it's tough. And I think it's, there's if you are particularly B2C, and you are an influencer, people are aspiring to be like, to have what you have, to buy the products that, like, so there is a veneer of fakeness sometimes that, and in those cases required to sell. I still think, there's an element that people would respect around some authenticity,
Yeah,
around it. But and so again, I'm going to say I think there's a balance. I reckon what are your goals and objectives? So I even tell people when you're thinking about your brand and your brand activation strategy, you need to connect it back to the goals and objectives you have for yourself. And again, I think they're very different if you're in that influencer world versus not. Um, but then I also say to the consumers, you need to question. Sometimes if it's too good to be true, it is.
yeah,
Right? Like what are you doing? But also to your question, Ivan, I think there are a lot of people who think I'm not exciting. I'm
yeah,
not exciting enough. My stories aren't going to resonate. Like, why am I going to tell them? And I just say, just start. I think you'd be amazed. Don't try to be all things to everyone.
mm,
Find your people, find your tribe, that, are going to love the stories that you tell.
yeah. Um, One of the things I wanted to run through with you, so the AI is doing, like, changing a lot of spaces, a lot
Mm.
of verticals out there. What do you see from your perspective? What's happening in your space?
Oh. Um, so I've been involved in and around AI for a long time. So first of all, got recruited out of banking into the world of outsourcing, contact center in particular. That was one of the first places that started with automation.
Yeah.
And then, moving, through generative and now AI. And the last 10 or 12 years, I've been heavily involved in like tech and tech adjacent or tech enabled firms. The last company I left, which I left not too long ago, I supported all of the things that enabled technology transformation, and particularly AI,
Mhm.
from building the business case to looking at the workforce. How do we think about trust and adoption, those kinds of things? And so, I mean, I think, we're rightful to question. I was traveling, and last week on the way back, I watched the AI doc. So it's a documentary about AI.
Okay.
It was a film, but he said his journey to becoming an apocalyptimist. And I love the way he described that.
I
So
know the guy. He wrote this book. Oh no, was it him? Uh, it- I'm sorry.
I forget I forget the director and producer's name. The guy, again, it's a
Uh-huh.
documentary. I forget his name.
Yeah.
So he had AI researchers, he had a majority of the AI tech firms interviewed. And so he starts with like the doomsday. He approached it, his wife was pregnant when he was starting this project, and he was very worried about what the life was going to look like for, his child, born into this. His jobs aren't going to exist and all of this. So that was the apocalypse side of it. But then, he said by the end of it, he was much more of an optimist when you think about what can it do in the things like medical research,
Mhm.
those kinds of things. So I love the phrase apocalyptimist. I think it's somewhere in between. I do worry. If you follow, I listened to Mo Gaudat, and so he's also got a documentary coming out soon. He was talking about it on a podcast just around the need to think about humanity with it. So I'm a capitalist. I'm very clear. I really support making money, but I like to do those in the right way, and in this case,
Yeah.
humanity. So roles, companies, structures are going to change. What I'm seeing is companies are fast to get out there with various use cases. I'm not sure they've always thought through what is your North Star as it relates to AI. I was working with one CIO, and he said, the CEO has told me I don't have a strategy. I'm like, well, do you? Like, let's have a conversation. Are you doing it? That for me, there's a combination that companies need to look at in building. Like, are you going to be an AI native company? Not everyone will be, but like, let's figure out what our use of it is. There's the top-down use cases which solve particular challenges, whether that's an insurance company around the actuaries are hard to find and very expensive. So there's a great use of that's a great use case, for an
Yeah.
insurance company. But then for those who need to reduce their costs and improve their productivity, that's the bottoms up build. But how do you get at that? So then you need to start looking at the organizational structures, the job and job architect, what tasks get performed, what make the most sense to automate. And then once that work gets automated, that gets left behind, what do you do with that? Is it fewer people doing more of the same? Do
Hmm.
you create new role structures? How do you build trust and build adoption? Like right now, even token maxing, like just because you've got a high use of token
Hmm.
consumption does not equate to productivity. So like we need to be measuring and looking at things very, very different.
I can't believe how fast this became the actual metric. It's just insane.
Yeah. 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 So I see that there's this trifecta. Right now, like it's being led in many companies. You know, the well, I say trifecta, but it's always led by the business. The business owns the business strategy, they own their P&L. And so they should be setting the strategy for what they need in terms of that, in particular use case or cost to be taken out. The trifecta in terms of who supports the business owners is the CIO. So technology should help enable that business strategy and
Yeah.
identify the tools, but then you've got the risk or governance around it. So, thinking about what guardrails do you put around it, what data goes in, who can use. And then the third, and this is the one that's almost always overlooked or they're brought in far too late, is HR. They are the experts in designing work structures
Yeah.
and roles and helping build trust and adoption and education plans. And so that often becomes an afterthought, which is why um, I think there's so many studies that show the percentage of digital transformations broadly, not AI specifically, that fail to achieve full value. We're seeing, and I think it's like 60, 70%. That's as high as 80,
Hmm.
90% for AI. And so BCG has this research paper that says they were talking about Gen AI when they wrote it last year, but I think, we should be thinking about it for agentic. They said the value of AI, the formula is 10, 20, 70. 10% is only going to come through the algorithms itself.
Mhm.
20% is the data and supporting technology around it.
Yeah.
70% is going to be people and process. So let's think much more holistically as we develop the strategy and not just the tech behind the implementation of AI
That's
within.
interesting framework, framing actually. Where did you say, where can I,
BCG is the one
BCG,
who, like, yeah,
10, 20, 70.
yeah.
Nice. Okay. Yeah, it makes sense actually. Do you see, like, what's your feeling around how willing are, especially corporations, to share their confidential or maybe even personal data out there to AIs in order to, do something meaningful with it? I mean, just to do the job essentially.
Um, well, I'm finding most companies have, stood up like some kind of an AI governance board.
Hmm.
But
But I mean, do you see
employees,
it? Do you see it on the field that actually someone is actually building this layer who is preparing the data to be safely used by Claude Code, Codex, you name
yeah,
it.
I'm seeing it, but I'm seeing that there's appropriate guardrails put in place at the corporate governance level, but I'm not, um, but then the rest of the employees need to understand that. Uh, and I also think there's a bit of a misconception. You need this massive data lake that itself for large companies that are struggling with that because it resides in so many different places. So finding about how do you just point to the different, places? That's where I say like analysis paralysis, where we're not waiting until you've got a single data lake. Like let's figure out how we move that forward. And I do think they try and put parameters and guardrails around it. And there's lots of clarity over we're not uploading confidential client and company information into Claude, into Chat GPT, unless it's the enterprise level that's connected within. But I'm still seeing, not with necessarily bad intention, lack of understanding of employees who do upload that information to help them with doing their work. And so
Yeah,
there's much more that needs to take place, I think, to protect it, because I think there's significant risk right now.
yeah, interesting. Cool. I think one perfect way to wrap up this conversation would be you seem like a person who ingested like tremendous amount of books. So I would just like to ask you like few of those names you can throw out at me and listeners
Oh,
to
so
actually, those who might change someone's life even. So
oh
think
wow.
in,
Well, so
think in
yeah,
those terms.
first of all, I've been a voracious reader my entire life. I remember being like a young child, like 9, 10 years old, reading Stephen King long novels, right? Like at that point. I have evolved over the years in large part because I do so much travel. I consume a majority of my content audibly now,
Hmm. Makes sense.
audiobooks, podcasts, etc. And as I said, I'm not a patient person. I listen, people talk too slowly. So I listen at 1.5 to 1.5,
Same.
1.25 to 1.5 times speed. So there's great books I can recommend. Beyond my own that I've written that help on some of these topics, I
Yeah,
mentioned
promote
things
it.
like
Promote it.
well, so I've written 5 books, the fifth of which comes out in the fall of this year. One was just a co-authored book called Unstoppable, which is like my life's philosophy. I contributed a chapter to that. Then I wrote one on personal branding. I wrote one on what I call the power of whole human leadership. So much of that evolution from Iron Maiden to Turtle, I talk about that. One that just came out earlier this year is on leadership transition. And it was kind of a modern take on the book The First 90 Days, which was written, I don't know, 15 or 20 years ago. So start talks about what does your first 90 days in a new role look like. So for me, it's a modern take on that with the leadership lens. So I'm kind of
Hmm.
bridging that whole human leadership. And then the fifth book that will come out later this year is the personal brand activation. When I wrote Influence Unleashed, which is what is a brand? How do you build a narrative? What does that look like? People were like, oh my God, okay, this is amazing, but what do I do with it now? So to some of the questions, Ivan, you were asking me. So that's the one
Yeah.
that will come out this fall. Beyond that, I think there's great books. I mentioned Keith Ferrazzi's Never Eat Alone, which is just around, being strategic and intentional around how you network. He's a shameless self-promoter in that consultant in that book, but if you just the nuggets that he talks about, I think are great. Also on relationship-based sale, and particularly in the B2B environment, the challenger sale and the challenger customer. One talks about the buying types based upon their intrinsic motivators, but the other is understanding. And I think that the second of those that book came out maybe 10 years ago. That at that point, the data point they cited was that for business to business decisions, it's an average of something like 5.2, 5.3 decision makers that are involved in that.
Hmm.
I think that number is like 7 or 8. The amount of consensus that happens in organizations. So understanding that, again, if you're in
Do
a business
tell.
to
That's
business,
actually interesting number.
yeah, so it's just so you combine those two. What are the individual types? Like what motivates them, but also who do you need to engage with? Like understanding the political landscape, the relationship landscape, and how do you build relationships to be successful in selling? And then
Mhm.
there's others just that I really love. Like I'm a big fan of Malcolm Gladwell. And so I've read, I think every one of his books. I like Simon Sinek. I told you I've embraced Radical Candor, which is a book that Kim Scott. That just gave me the phrase around it. I feel like you've embraced that mostly, but I think those are all good reads, certainly for those in business. And then there's a ton of podcasts that I listen to. I consume like I used to at the gym. I'm an avid like I work out 6 days a week, and I love music, but now almost my entire gym workout is consumed by listening to news and business podcasts.
Yeah, I feel you. Good info, good info. I think I have nothing more here. It's amazing. There's a lot of questions I would definitely like to have ran through around two, if you allow me sometime in the future.
Sure.
Yeah, a lot of questions opened up, and I think we should definitely go to these as well. I'll connect you with a friend of mine who I mentioned earlier. I think you'll definitely have some interesting ideas to bounce off each
Great.
other.
Love it.
And yeah, perfect. Thanks so much for your time, Victoria. Much
Yeah,
appreciated.
it was great, Evan.
I enjoyed.
Okay.